Today we will learn about SohCahToa. SohCahToa. But before we do that, let's review what we know about a right triangle. Here we have a right triangle. What does a right triangle have? Well, it has a right angle, a hypotenuse. The hypotenuse will always be the longest side and the side opposite to the right angle. We will be given one of the angles and then the sides, one of the sides. This side is known as the adjacent side, which means it's next to the angle given. This side is the opposite side, which means it's opposite to the angle given. So SohCahToa. What is SohCahToa? Well, SohCahToa is an acronym for the equations we will use to figure out the other sides of a triangle. A right triangle, that is. For so, we use sine of the angle given, which is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. We will use cosine of the angle given, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse. And we will use tangent of the angle given, which is the adjacent over the opposite. Adjacent over the opposite. Alright, now let's take a look at a problem given. Okay, here we have the right triangle. What do we know about this right triangle? Well, we're given that an angle is 28 degrees, and we're also given that the hypotenuse is 15 inches. What are we trying to figure out? Well, we're trying to figure out what x is. And x also happens to be opposite of the angle given. So now let's look for one of the equations that will incorporate opposite and hypotenuse. Oh, here we go. Sine. Sine uses opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. So now let's see. Sine of 28 degrees is opposite, which is x over hypotenuse, which is 15 inches. Alright, so we're trying to get the x alone. So we're going to multiply 15 on both sides. So we have x is 15 times the sine of 28 degrees. To figure out the sine of 28 degrees, we're going to use a calculator. The sine of 28 degrees is 0.469. So x is equal to 15 times 0.469. Now let's finish this up. And we have x is equal to 7.035. And we have x, our opposite. Alright, now let's take a look at the same problem, only now we're trying to find y. Y is also the adjacent side to angle 28. So now let's take a look at what equation we would use. Well, would we use sine? No, because that one uses opposite and hypotenuse, where we're trying to find the adjacent. And we wouldn't use tangent as well, because tangent uses opposite and not hypotenuse, as we have here. Alright, so it has to be cosine, because it uses the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Now let's take a look at that. Cosine of 28 degrees is equal to adjacent, which is y, over the hypotenuse, which is 15 inches. Now we're going to multiply 15 on both sides to get y alone. 15, which gives us y is equal to 15 times cosine of 28. Now we're going to use our calculator to figure out what cosine of 28 degrees is. And cosine of 28 degrees is 0.833. So we have 15 times 0.833 is equal to y. Now let's simple that up. We get y is equal to 13.244. So we found y and our adjacent side. Now let's take a look at a different triangle. This triangle looks a little different just because it's facing a different direction, but the same rules still apply. Now let's take a look at what we do know. We know that we have a 40-degree angle, and we have a 20-centimeter side. This 20-centimeter side is next to the 40-degree angle, which means it's the adjacent. And the r is the hypotenuse because it's directly opposite to the 90-degree angle. And the q is the opposite side because it's directly opposite to the 40-degree angle given. Alright, so now what equation would we use? Well, we wouldn't use sine. We wouldn't use cosine. Oh, then we would use tangent, because it takes the opposite over the adjacent. Now let's take a look at that. Tangent of 40 degrees is equal to opposite, which is q, over 20, which is the adjacent side. Alright? So now we're going to multiply 20 to both sides to get q alone. So we have q is equal to 20 times tangent of 40. Now let's look at what tangent of 40 is using our calculator. We get 0.839. So we know q is equal to 20 times 0.839. So let's simplify that. Q is equal to 16.78. And there we have it. We have Q, which is our opposite. Alright, now let's look at the same problem, but what would happen if we're trying to look for R? Well, we know that R is our hypotenuse because it's opposite to the 90-degree angle. Well, we're not going to use sine, are we? No. Are we going to use cosine? Yeah, that's correct. Alright, so let's look at that. Cosine of 40 degrees is 20 over R. Alright, so we're going to try to get R alone. In order to do that, we're going to multiply R to both sides. Which means we'll have R times cosine of 40 degrees is equal to 20. Remember, we're trying to get r alone, so we have to divide by cosine of 40 degrees to both sides. So we get r is equal to 20 divided by cosine of 40. Well, let's use our calculators to see what cosine of 40 is. We get 0.766. So r is equal to 20 divided by 0.766. Okay? Let's use our calculators again. And we get r is equal to 26.12 centimeters. And there you have it. We found r and our hypotenuse. All right, so now let's see how we would apply what we learned today to the real world. Okay, well, the other day I was walking in the park and I saw this really cool tree and I wanted to see how tall it was. And then I measured how far away I was from it, and I was about 60 feet from it. And from the bottom to the top, it was about 35 degrees. So I was looking 35 degrees up. And I wanted to see how tall the tree was, right? So what is the height of the tree? Well, the height of the tree is opposite to 35 degrees. So that means it's the opposite side. And we know that I'm 60 feet away from the tree. So that makes this the adjacent side. So we're using opposite and adjacent. So we're going to use tangent. So tangent of 35 degrees is x over 60, because we have our opposite over our adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So we're going to multiply both sides by 60. We get 60 times tangent of 35 degrees is equal to x. So x is equal to 60 times 0.7. So x is equal to 42 feet. So the tree was about 42 feet.